Hi, this is Chris Young. Welcome to episode 59 of Contemplating Life, Oscar edition. The 96th Annual Academy Awards will be awarded this Sunday, March 10th. This is the last of my series on the Oscar-nominated films for 2024. After this episode, I'm going to take the rest of the month off, and I'll return with new episodes in April. This has been a labor of love, but it's a labor nevertheless. Our final category contains my favorite film of the year and the film that is most likely to win significant numbers of awards, including Best Picture. So we've saved the best for last. I call this category Troubled Geniuses. We begin with Christopher Nolan's epic movie Oppenheimer. It's the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, who led the Los Alamos portion of the Manhattan Project to develop the first atomic bomb. The film is actually two interconnected stories told in parallel. We have the story of Oppenheimer, beginning with his career as a young physics student, through his development of the atomic bomb, and eventually his activism to promote nuclear disarmament. This part of the story is described in a title card called fission, which is the term for splitting an atom. It releases a tremendous amount of energy. This portion of the film is shot in color 70mm IMAX film. The parallel story is that of Louis Strauss, who is the trustee for the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, and who later led the Atomic Energy Commission. This portion of the story is described in a title card as fusion, which is the process of combining hydrogen atoms into helium, also releasing tremendous amounts of energy. It's the process that powers the sun and all of the stars, and it's the process of the hydrogen bomb that Strauss promoted. This portion of the film, told from Strauss' perspective, is shot in black and white 70mm IMAX film, which was specially produced for the project because no one had ever used black and white IMAX before. The framework of these two stories surrounds hearings regarding the careers of these two men. Oppenheimer appeared for several weeks before a special committee of the Atomic Energy Commission in April and May 1954, as he appealed the revocation of his security clearance. At the time, he was a highly popular public figure for his role in developing the atomic bomb, and that was credited for ending World War II. Oppenheimer had hoped that the development of a weapon as powerful as an atomic bomb would make war unthinkable in the future, and would essentially end all wars. He opposed the development of the more powerful hydrogen bomb, and was a strong advocate for negotiated arms treaties. This opposition to further atomic weapon development, as well as his past affiliations with known communists, led to the revocation of his security clearance. The story opens with Oppenheimer, played by Cillian Murphy, testifying before this committee. He chooses to tell his life story so that his work can be understood in the proper context. So his portion of the film is told as a flashback as he testifies before the AEC committee. Strauss is played by Robert Downey Jr. His portion of the film also centers around a hearing. He is being considered for a position in the Eisenhower administration as Secretary of Commerce in 1958. Strauss testifies before the Senate committee approving his appointment and recounts the story of his feud with Oppenheimer over the development of the hydrogen bomb. His story is told in flashbacks from that hearing. Although these two stories are told in parallel, Clearly, this is primarily Oppenheimer's story. It begins with him as a graduate student in Cambridge, where he proved to be clumsy and inept in the laboratory. At one point, he was so frustrated with his scientific advisor at Cambridge that he tried to poison him with a poison apple. A fictionalized version of this true incident is shown in the film. Fortunately, he stopped before the man was poisoned. Oppenheimer left Cambridge for the University of Göttingen in Germany to study under Max Born. Göttingen was one of the world's leading centers for theoretical physics. Freed from his inability to perform in the lab, Oppenheimer prospered in theoretical physics. He became an expert in the new field of quantum mechanics and returned to the U.S. to teach quantum theory at Caltech. His brother Frank, also a physicist, was active in the American Communist Party. Oppenheimer never joined the party, but was intrigued by the support of everyday workers, and he contributed to programs to help refugees in the Spanish Civil War, and those funds were distributed through the Communist Party. Now you must understand that the early communist movement in the U.S. was about workers' rights and other liberal causes, but was not yet associated with the kind of dictatorships that developed in Russia, China, and other communist countries. So there wasn't quite the stigma of the Communist Party early on. Oppenheimer had a relationship with Berkeley activist Jean Tatlock, who was also active in communist politics. He eventually married Kitty Puning, who had also been involved in communist politics at Berkeley, but had renounced communism before she met Oppenheimer. They had an affair, and she became pregnant. Kitty's husband gave her a divorce, and she and Oppenheimer were married. They eventually had 3 children together. Oppenheimer was recruited by General Leslie Grove to lead a top-secret project to develop an atomic weapon. Grove is brilliantly played by Matt Damon. Grove was well aware of the communist skeletons in Oppenheimer's closet and pushed to get him his security clearance despite that. But in the film, Oppenheimer figures out that Grove was not ignoring his previous communist entanglements, but had specifically recruited him in hopes that he could hold those entanglements over his head and control him. Oppenheimer and his brother Frank loved to roam the deserts of New Mexico, and he had always dreamed of finding a way of combining his love with New Mexico with his love for physics. He recommended a location called Los Alamos, where the Army would build an entire city, complete with homes, schools, churches, and entertainment. Oppenheimer knew he could not recruit the best scientists in the country unless they could bring their families with them. The film chronicles some of the difficulties faced in this groundbreaking endeavor of creating a nuclear weapon. There were competing theories on how it should be done, and there were early moves to create a hydrogen bomb. Although to detonate a hydrogen bomb, one must use a uranium or plutonium atomic bomb. So they had to build the atomic bomb first anyway. I don't think it's a spoiler to say they did build an atomic bomb. Oppenheimer then began actively working towards nuclear disarmament, and that caused great controversy. The committee reviewing his security clearance was stacked against him, and he never had a chance at winning. During his testimony, it was revealed that he continued to have an affair with Jean Tatlock after he was married to Kitty. Kitty was aware of the affair, but the way it was depicted in this hearing is quite explicit. I won't spoil that for you. The latter half of the film focuses on Strauss and his Senate hearings as he tries to explain his feud with the popular physicists. Christopher Nolan is known for his extensive use of IMAX sequences in previous films such as the Batman Dark Knight trilogy, Inception, Tenet, and Dunkirk. This film was shot almost entirely in IMAX or other 65mm film formats where IMAX would have been impractical. There was great hype that the film would be shown in IMAX 70mm film in only 30 locations around the world, and only 19 of them in the U.S. With a 3-hour runtime, most of these theaters had to install special film platters to hold the 11 miles of film, which weighed nearly 600 pounds. The print was shipped to theaters packaged in 53 smaller reels, which then had to be carefully spliced together by trained projectionists to produce the giant continuous 3-hour print. There were other digital IMAX and 70mm showings, but none of those were full 70mm IMAX. One of the theaters that did show it in full IMAX 70mm film was the IMAX theater at the Indiana State Museum at White River State Park here in Indianapolis, and I was able to see the film at that location. Now, if you've heard recent episodes of this podcast, you know what a huge fan I am of IMAX, and you also know I'm quite a science nerd. You would think that this was the ultimate viewing experience for a geek like me. While it was an amazing film, with a compelling story, well written, well acted, well shot, and certainly worthy of its 13 Oscar nominations, overall for me, it was no big deal. I go to IMAX, or go out to any theater, because I want to get my eyes maxed. I want to see something spectacular and immersive. I want to be taken to places, whether they're real or fantasy, that I could not otherwise go. Except for the actual detonation sequence during the test at Los Alamos, which wasn't that spectacular, by the way. There was nothing about this film that needed to be seen in a theater, let alone an IMAX. The vast majority of the film is people sitting around arguing about physics, politics, communism, and extramarital affairs. And none of that needs to be experienced 60 feet tall with state-of-the-art digital surround. While I'm eternally grateful that we have filmmakers like Christopher Nolan, James Cameron, and others who are keeping IMAX alive, this particular film was not a great showcase for the format. Now, don't get me wrong, it's an amazing film. I liked it a lot. It's my third favorite of the year, and it deserves all of its nominations. It will likely win a bunch of them. It's just not why I spend premium prices and risk my health to see something in IMAX. I quite enjoyed a second viewing of the film, streaming on my 23-inch desktop computer monitor. Even viewing it on my roommate's 55-inch 4K TV wasn't really necessary. In addition to its Best Picture nomination, Christopher Nolan is nominated as Best Director and has a good shot at winning. He has cleverly crafted a compelling story that dives deep into the minds of two amazing people, Oppenheimer and Strauss. These are complex characters with complex motivations who shaped history. The attention to detail is phenomenal. There are dozens of minor things that only physicists would appreciate. For example, at a social gathering, there's someone in the background playing bongo drums. Now, only physics nerds know that physicist Richard Feynman was famous for playing bongo drums. He's never mentioned in the film or identified as Richard Feynman, but he's there in the background. There are a bunch of other examples of that kind of detail. Nolan has already won directing BAFTA and DGA awards for the film. Cillian Murphy completely transforms into the character. Anyone who has seen video or photographs of the actual man can appreciate how much he has embodied Oppenheimer. And from what I've read about the man, it's not just his appearance that he has recreated. He is nominated as Best Lead Actor and is likely to win. It's my second favorite actor performance of the year. Robert Downey Jr. gives a chilling performance as the manipulative, confining Strauss. His nomination for supporting actor is well deserved. Emily Blunt is consistently interesting as Oppenheimer's wife, Kitty. She's someone who's devoted her life to supporting her husband at great cost and has forgiven him for his extramarital affair. She's constantly encouraging him to fight the forces against him. Yet when she's called to testify before the committee, she struggles to maintain her composure in the face of attacks against her. Fighting the committee isn't as easy as she thought it would be. She's deservedly nominated for a Supporting Actress Oscar and is my third favorite pick in that category. The film is also nominated for the adapted screenplay by Christopher Nolan, for photography, production design, and sound, all of which are richly deserved. I have no opinion about the nominations for musical score, makeup and hair, costume design, and film editing, except to say that the hair and costumes looked period authentic, and the score seemed to heighten the tension in the film. Its 13 BAFTA nominations included wins for Best Picture, Best Director for Nolan, Lead Actor Murphy, Supporting Actor Downey, Cinematography, Editing, and Musical Score. Its 8 Golden Globe nominations included wins for Best Drama, Best Director Nolan, Best Actor Murphy, Supporting Actor Downey, and Musical Score. The musical score also won a Grammy for Best Score Soundtrack for Visual Media. There were 4 SAG nominations, including wins for Murphy, Downey, and the ensemble cast. IMDb lists 305 wins and 381 other nominations. It was released in the U.S. in July and produced on an estimated budget of $100 million. It's earned nearly $330 million in the U.S. and Canada and $957 million worldwide. It's currently being shown in some theaters, although not in IMAX. It is available for streaming on Peacock, for rent or purchase on Amazon and YouTube, and for purchase on DVD, Blu-ray, and 4K Blu-ray. I highly recommend the film, although you've already heard my thoughts about seeing it in a theater or on IMAX or 4K. Our final film of the year is my favorite of the 10 Best Picture nominated films. Maestro stars Bradley Cooper as legendary composer, conductor, and pianist Leonard Bernstein. While I was impressed with Cillian Murphy totally inhabiting the character of Oppenheimer, it's nothing compared to what Bradley Cooper achieves in his portrayal of this musical legend. The opening scene shows Bernstein late in life, sitting at the piano and being interviewed by a camera crew. He talks nostalgically about his late wife, actress Felicia Montealegre, who was his inspiration and muse. I had to remind myself I was watching Bradley Cooper. I'm familiar with Leonard Bernstein from many TV programs and YouTube videos I've seen about the great man. It was as if Bernstein was brought back to life before my eyes. The hair, makeup, voice, mannerisms, body language, everything about the man became incarnate in this film. After seeing the film, I became even more obsessed with Bernstein and began watching hours and hours of YouTube videos and documentaries about the great genius. With every minute that I watched, I became more and more impressed with Bradley Cooper's performance. He's nominated as Best Lead Actor, and by far my favorite performance of the year by anyone, male or female. In addition to the lead role, Cooper also produced, directed, and co-wrote the screenplay, all of which were nominated. Consider that he also starred in, produced, directed, and co-wrote the screenplay for his previous film, A Star is Born, which earned 9 Oscar nominations. He is proving to be an amazing filmmaker. If he does not win any Oscars this year, it's just a matter of time before he's finally recognized as the top of his craft. After that opening scene with Bernstein in his late years, it jumps back to the earliest days of his career. He had to fill in as conductor at the last minute without any rehearsal to conduct the New York Philharmonic in Carnegie Hall when guest conductor Bruno Walter fell ill. The next day, a rave review was published on the front page of the New York Times and was picked up by multiple other newspapers. The performance also aired on CBS radio around the country. This rocketed Bernstein to instant fame. Although the film follows his career from that famous debut to his works late in life, it's not your typical biopic about the career of a genius. The film instead focuses primarily on his relationship with his wife Felicia, who's brilliantly played by Carey Mulligan. That performance has earned her a lead actress nomination. The film is a love story about two extremely passionate people. And like some of the other films we've reviewed, it shows us the price that is paid by those close to very driven people. Bernstein had multiple affairs with both women and men. This naturally put a great strain on his marriage. He remained totally closeted about his sexuality, and when rumors arose about his relationships with men, he flatly denied everything. There was an especially poignant conversation with his daughter, where he lied to her about his relationships in an attempt to spare her feelings. Cooper uses a variety of cinematic styles to establish the time period being depicted. Early in Bernstein's career, it was filmed in black and white in a traditional 4:3 nearly square aspect ratio used by early films. Later in the story, it switches to color, but still in that narrow 4:3 ratio. These scenes recreate the era much in the same way that The Holdovers established its era by its cinematic choices. Only later does the film switch to a widescreen format in full color. While the switch between color and black and white was occasionally distracting in Oppenheimer, this progression of film styles in Maestro greatly enhanced the experience and helped set the time frame and the mood of each scene. Except for that opening scene late in his life, the rest of the story is told chronologically, so the shift in cinematic style feels like a natural part of that progression. It's a very effective filmmaking technique. Bernstein separated from Felicia in 1976, but reunited with her the next year when she developed lung cancer. He put his career on hold, canceling many appearances so that he could care for her until her death in June 1978. The film concludes with a recreation of Bernstein conducting the London Symphony Orchestra in a famous performance of Gustav Mahler's Second Symphony, Resurrection, at the Ely Cathedral in Cambridgeshire, England. Words cannot describe what a magnificent piece of filmmaking and acting appears in this single scene. It's an achievement beyond belief. I've seen video of the actual performance, and to say that Cooper has channeled the great maestro is a huge understatement. The film has been criticized because it glosses over some of Bernstein's greatest works. For example, the beloved musical West Side Story is barely mentioned at all. But as I said in the beginning, this is not your typical biopic. It's the love story between Bernstein and his wife, and it tells that story beautifully. In addition to Best Picture, its 7 Oscar nominations include lead actor for Bradley Cooper, lead actress Carey Mulligan, screenplay Bradley Cooper and Josh Singer, cinematography, sound, hair and makeup, all of which are greatly deserved. And yes, for once, I do have an opinion about hair and makeup. It was essential to his transformation into Bernstein. It had 7 BAFTA nominations and 4 Golden Globe nominations, as well as SAG nominations for Cooper and Mulligan. IMDb lists 21 wins and 179 nominations. It was released in December on an estimated budget of $80 million. However, this Netflix production only grossed $383,000 worldwide. But as we mentioned previously, such box office numbers are meaningless for films that are produced for streaming and have only a limited theatrical release. I have insufficient words to describe how magnificent this film is. Please watch it. Also check out some of the links in the description, which include executive producer Steven Spielberg interviewing director Bradley Cooper about the film. Be sure to check out the behind-the-scenes feature, which includes interviews from Bernstein's daughter talking about how much they loved Cooper's performance. The Bernstein family cooperated in the production of the film. Also check out my side-by-side comparison of Bradley Cooper and Bernstein, both conducting the London Symphony Orchestra at Ely Cathedral. I've also linked actual footage of Leonard Bernstein, and if there's not sufficient West Side Story for you in this film, check out the documentary I linked, which shows Bernstein conducting West Side Story for a recording that features operatic singers playing all of the parts. Well, folks, that wraps up our detailed look at 14 films nominated for Oscars this year. Let's recap the entire bunch, and I'll rank my favorites in order, and then I'll tell you who I think will actually win. Now keep in mind that although The Zone of Interest was difficult to watch, and Poor Things was sufficiently bizarre that it might not appeal to everyone, I have to say I enjoyed all of these films on some level. There's not a stinker in the bunch. Counting down to my number 1 favorite in each of these categories. Let's start with adapted screenplays. Number 5, Zone of Interest. Number 4, Poor Things. Number 3, Oppenheimer. Number 2, Barbie. And my favorite adapted screenplay of the year is for American Fiction, for creating a memorable character and some deep satire. I love it even though it doesn't have a chance to win. Oppenheimer is likely to win, but part of me hopes that Greta Gerwig would win for Barbie. For original screenplay, we have number 5, Past Lives. Number 4, May December. Number 3, Maestro. Number 2, The Holdovers, for its witty charm and a clever twist on some old tropes. And finally, my favorite original screenplay is Anatomy of a Fall, for that amazing scene in which the husband and wife realistically argue, as well as for the clever way it seems to resolve the story, but leaves so many doubts lingering. It's a phenomenal piece of writing. Now for supporting actress. Number 5, Danielle Brooks in The Color Purple. That's one of only 2 nominations with which I disagreed. Number 4, America Ferrera in Barbie. Number 3, Emily Blunt in Oppenheimer. Number 2, Divine Joy Randolph in The Holdovers, who is likely to win, and I will not be disappointed if she does. And naturally, my number 1 pick is, you guessed it, Jodie Foster in Naiad. It really is a great performance, and it's not just my obsessive bias for Jodie Foster. Next category, lead actress. I enjoyed all of these performances, so I consider it nearly a 5-way tie. But if I had to rank them, I would say number 5, Carey Mulligan in Maestro. Number 4, Lily Gladstone, Killers of the Flower Moon. After some reconsideration, I promoted her from 5th to 4th. She's likely to win, and it will be a close call between her and my 3rd pick, Emma Stone, in Poor Things. My 2 favorite performances haven't got a chance, but I greatly enjoyed number 2, Annette Bening in Naiad, and I was totally blown away by my favorite of the group, Sandra Hüller in Anatomy of a Fall. I plan to look up more of her films. Keep your eyes open for her in the future. I expect great things. Next category, supporting actor. Number 5, Ryan Gosling in Barbie, which is the other nomination that I felt was undeserved, even though I found it quite amusing. Number 4, Sterling K. Brown in American Fiction, which was okay, but probably forgettable. Number 3, Mark Ruffalo in Poor Things, which had me in stitches at so many points. Number 2, Robert De Niro, Killers of the Flower Moon, who remains at the top of his form, and is a very close second to my favorite in the category, Robert Downey Jr. in Oppenheimer, which is likely to win. In fact, I think Robert Downey in Oppenheimer is the only one of my favorites that is likely to win. Hey, I gotta pick a winner sometime, don't I? Well, we'll see. We're going to take the lead actors from the top down this time. As you've just seen, Bradley Cooper in Maestro blew me away. I could easily cop out and say it's a 4-way tie for second place, but if forced to make a choice, I would pick number 2, Paul Giamatti in The Holdovers, number 3, Cillian Murphy in Oppenheimer, who's likely to win, number 4, Coleman Domingo in Rustin, and number 5, Jeffrey Wright in American Fiction. All 5 were phenomenal performances. For director, I'm a bit disappointed that Bradley Cooper was not nominated, but it was really his performance that shined the most. I wouldn't bump anyone from this list to make room for him or, for example, Greta Gerwig. I may have rearranged these from comments made in previous episodes, but here's where I stand now. All 5 of these directors have done an amazing job this year, but if I had to pick them, number 5, Jonathan Glazer, The Zone of Interest, number 4, Yorgos Lanthimos, Poor Things. Number 3, Christopher Nolan for Oppenheimer, who's likely to win. Number 2, Justine Triet, Anatomy of a Fall, for the choices she made in showing that domestic argument and the overall structure of the courtroom scenes. And that leaves us at number 1 with Grandmaster Martin Scorsese, Killers of the Flower Moon, who at age 81 still keeps topping himself year after year. Finally, we come to the Best Picture. Although I might put an asterisk next to the recommendation for a couple of these films, as I said before, there's not a stinker in the bunch. Counting down. Number 10, The Zone of Interest. Number 9, Past Lives. Number 8, Barbie. Number 7, Poor Things. Number 6, Killers of the Flower Moon. Number 5, American Fiction. Number 4, The Holdovers. Number 3, Oppenheimer, which will likely win, but Barbie might be a dark horse. Number 2, Anatomy of a Fall, mostly because of the writing and the lead actress performance by Sandra Hüller, and the way it kept me guessing, even after the film was over. It was a very entertaining experience. And as you know, my favorite of the bunch was Maestro, for the reasons previously stated. Last year I covered 10 films and 3 episodes, and I wore myself out editing all the trailers, still photos, and movie clips into the YouTube version of the podcast. When I finished, I said to myself, I'm not going to do that in such detail next year. It was too much work. Well, so much for that resolution. This year I did 14 films in 6 episodes in even more detail. The editing was just as extensive as I tried to get movie clips and still photos to match up with the narration. On top of that, I had just done 3 other movie-related episodes. That's 9 episodes in a row that were far more difficult than my usual talking head episodes. I had to throw out my usual schedule of releasing episodes on Monday mornings so I could get everything done in time for the Oscar ceremony this Sunday. I'm totally exhausted, but I loved every minute of it. Who knows what I'll do next year? Maybe we'll throw in the animated features that I wanted to watch this year, but I didn't have time. I will return with a new episode for my Patreon supporters on April 1st, and that episode will be released to the general public on April the 8th. Why do I love movies so much? Because they are all about contemplating life. I find them to be educational, entertaining, enlightening, and even inspiring. If you find this podcast to be educational, entertaining, enlightening, or even inspiring, consider sponsoring me on Patreon for just $5 per month. You'll get early access to the podcast and other exclusive content. Although finances are tight, I don't do this for the money, but every little bit helps. As always, my deepest thanks to my financial supporters. I'll never be able to thank you enough. Even if you don't provide financial support, please share a link of this podcast so I can grow my audience. I just want more people to hear my stories. You can check out any of my back episodes, which are all available where you found this episode. If you have any comments, questions, or other feedback, please feel free to comment on any of the platforms where you find this podcast. Tell me what you liked or did not like about any of these films. Who are your picks to win the Oscar this year? I'll see you next month as we continue contemplating life. Until then, fly safe, everyone.